Greetings, this is Timothy Youngst, also known as a digital apothecary. So, on a recommendation, I was told I should try recording and seeing what it would be like if I just talked about these studies that I'm trying to put out on a weekly basis to basically identify what research and papers relevant to the digital health and the digital therapeutics market are coming and being published. So, I'm going to give this a shot. I would welcome your comments and let me know what you think about this. So I had 6 papers published that I came across that I thought were relatively interesting from in the week of November 12th through the 18th. And the first one I'm going to talk about is MySafeRx. And what this is, it's a kind of electronic platform that was being used. It was a 28-day study, and only 12 patients were in it. But it was really dedicated towards trying to identify, can you use this to basically help out with buprenorphine or naloxone adherence, basically for those with opioid use disorder. And it was a kind of a mixed intervention, kind of almost, because you have a what I thought was relatively interesting, an electronic pill dispenser, called the Medica Safe 3000. So if you pull up the study, you can actually see what it looks like, and you can actually find a company which is called Medica Safe. And they also use text messaging and video conferencing for remote coaching. And this study really wasn't looking at efficacy. And a lot of these studies that are coming out aren't looking at efficacy. They're more or less looking at feasibility. And what I found was that there seemed to be some good reception in terms of utilization. So hopefully we'll see basically other people maybe try and look into this further, and this company might take it a little bit step further with their MySafeRx platform. The second one is interesting. It's in tuberculosis. So those of you that follow the virtual direct oral treatment programs, or basically VDOT, and it's basically directly observed therapy. So it comes down to using some kind of technology to remotely make sure someone swallows their medications. So tuberculosis is a big thing. It's a big problem. And oftentimes you may have clinics where patients that are on some kind of medication need to come in for treatment, and on a daily basis, they have to be seen by a nurse or another health professional to make sure they swallow the medication. And in this case, what we're seeing is because of the advent of the smartphone and the camera, a bunch of companies are coming out. So you have Emoca Health, you have AI Cure. In this case, you have SureAd here. And SureAd here, this is one of their first publications looking into basically the evidence in supporting its use. So they actually did a pretty good sized study about 274 patients with the traditional directly observed therapy versus 159 patients. I flipped that. It was 274 patients in the VDOT program, 159 patients in the traditional directly observed therapy. And again, this is a feasibility study trying to see, does this work? And it seems like it had some promising results. And a lot of these programs out here have been targeting either tuberculosis seems to be a big one. Another one that's been coming up is how can we use these VDOT programs for medical trials in pharma, basically make sure people are being adherent to the therapy for the intervention groups. And in this case, their big argument is that there is a large acceptance from patients using this program, and that they can promise better adherence at a lower cost, which makes sense because if you're talking about overhead for a patient going to see a nurse or someone driving out to make sure they take the medication versus just using a smartphone, I mean, that's a bottom line. That's saving a lot of money there. The third one is basically called barriers and facilitators of using censored medication adherence devices. And their emphasis was in multiple myeloma. It's not really that big, but it's relatively interesting in terms of a smart pill bottle market. If you've watched some other publications and articles they put out about the smart pill bottles, there's been a lot of negative studies on these things. There hasn't been a lot of positive results, especially that they're not leading to any kind of efficacy outcome in terms of better adherence and clinical well-being. So in this case, though, it was just a small feasibility study, again, in 20 patients that were using a smart pill bottle for oral oncological medications. And what's interesting, though, is this one stood out to me because this one actually had a high percentage, well, 80% of 20 patients in African American demographics, which stands out to me because it's not relatively a common population that gets a lot of digital health interventions. It's always been my big kind of criticism of digital health. It doesn't really play well towards lower socioeconomic groups. So this one might stand out if you want to look to see the results and what these population mean of this. Fourth one is smartphone app and self-management of chronic low back pain. Okay, so the reason why I mentioned this is that there's been a number of companies coming out that are trying to make digital therapeutic apps for some kind of pain management or some kind of health and wellness. and some of them have actually been approved and now qualify as digital therapeutics, such as Kaya. That one, if you've never seen it, look it up. It's a pretty cool lower back pain management app. And this one seems to be, I'm kind of curious. This company called SnapCare is going to take this in the same route and try and make it into digital therapeutics. For those of you that are monitoring this stuff and watching out, it might be worth reading into it and just seeing what the competition is going to be like and what their interventions were. Now, the last two publications are more or less reviews. One, I recommend for those of you that are in the diabetes space and in the digital therapeutic space. This was a interesting report from the Diabetes Technology Society that was just talking about how does the FDA pre-certification for digital health software come about and what things they should consider. So I would say it might be a good read for those of you that are interested in the space and just seeing what things are being talked about. So throwing it out there for that. Next one is home blood pressure measurement and digital health. This was cool because this was more focused on the European market, and it was talking about how their guidelines were trying to add on blood pressure monitoring and how they were using applications for it, and they've only identified a few that they actually trust and such. So they kind of gave a big talk about how does digital health come into monitoring of hypertension and how they may lead to better treatment and such. And I think that's really cool because I think we're going to see start guidelines integrating digital health shortly. I'm hoping the ADA would probably start doing this too, and then the ACC AHA would also start adding on this stuff. I mean, ACC, AHA with their hypertension guidelines have talked a lot about home monitoring, and digital health and digital therapeutics seems like a natural fit there, especially when you start having companies like Omada Health, Livongo come out. So I think this is relatively a good moment to see this support coming about. So that's a rundown for these papers I want to talk about this week. I'm working on my next week articles. I have a few that have come out, and I think they'll be relatively interesting. Again, this is a test. I would like to get your feedback, see if you found this interesting. Is it something that you might find valuable? Feel free to leave me comments, and have a good day. And happy Thanksgiving. Yes.